All right, thank you, everyone. We're going to start the informational meeting on the fire and police pension millage. We're going to start off with a PowerPoint. I'll do first one. Our consultants that helped with the road strategy will do the second part, and then I'll finish up with the third part. And we've got the podium for any questions. So, and we do have some more seats up here. Anybody? All right, we have put this informational meeting together to talk about the millage that is on the March 10th ballot. With us tonight, Cheryl Gregory with Rowe Engineering. James Vitrino is a financial consultant. The mayor, Bob Paul, and Commissioner Joe Roselle and Commissioner Michelle Elder will be joining us shortly. All right, so this is kind of how we got here. We have, over the years, been taking steps to reduce our costs and increase our revenue where we can. Some of the steps that we have taken thus far is make sure all new hires go in a defined contribution pension plan. We have eliminated retiree health insurance for new hires. We converted a full-time position at the recreation center to a part-time position. The active employee health insurance benefits have been modified, but we still need to address our aging infrastructure. We're currently at our charter maximum in terms of limit of millage, and we are unlikely to get any additional resources from the state, county, or federal government. In fact, the Michigan Municipal League, which is an advocacy group for cities and villages, put together a campaign called Save My City, which is to educate residents about the reduction in revenue sharing that we have been receiving from the state. So the next slide is kind of shows you where Michigan ranks, which is the very end with the long red line there in terms of change in municipal revenues that cities have gotten from states. So the entire Save My City presentation is on the website if you want to take a look at it and get a little bit more information. But we are dealing with a lot of fiscal constraints, and this is just one of them. So knowing that although our budget is balanced right now and we have a really good bond rating, the commission knew that our long-term projections were such that we're not going to be able to sustain the current level of services with the constraints that we have. So in 2018, they appointed residents to an ad hoc budget committee. Several of them are here tonight. And they asked the committee to review the city's long-term financial health, as well as making recommendations on a long-term plan to reconstruct the remaining roads and fund the last phase of sewer repairs. So at the, these are the recommendations from the budget committee. For the library, they suggested that we consider alternative revenue sources through a dedicated millage just for the library, which is something that we are looking into. In the recreation department, they suggested that a fee study be conducted to determine that those programs and activities that residents use, that the cost to participate in those cover the cost to provide the programming. For instance, our pool rates set so that they cover the cost of operating the pool. And that's something that Commission, as a matter of fact, is going to be taking up at their February meeting to bring in a consultant to help with that fee study so we can get that underway. City Hall, they just suggested that we look at our IT operations for possible efficiencies and create a more robust online presence. And then at Public Safety and Public Works, continue to look for opportunities to share costs for service delivery. So then that brings us to the recommendation for the sewer improvement plan and the road plan. Total project cost for the sewer repairs is about $14.9 million. We are already collecting some revenue on water bills with a flat rate. And then in November of 2018, residents approved a bond for some additional sewer repairs, but there still is some work that remains to be done. So we're going to sell a capital bond in April to do that remaining work. And then that bond repayment fee will be added to the sewer bill. It's going to be based on usage of water, and the average user will see an increase of about $48 a quarter. That was the recommendation from the Budget Committee for the sewer improvement plan, and that was accepted by the City Commission. On the road, we brought in SEMCOG, and they did a rating of the roads. They drove all the roads. There is a surface evaluation that was made, and they determined that 45% of our interior roads are considered in poor condition. By interior, it means all the roads except the Service Drive, Coolidge, and 11 Mile. So the committee, working with our consultants, reviewed several different scenarios to improve the overall condition of the roads and came up with a strategy, but that road plan, of course, requires a dedicated source of revenue. So what I'd like to do now, first to see if there's any questions on how we got here, and then we'll move on to the presentation by the consultants so that you understand exactly what that road strategy entails and what it looks like. So any questions on the long-term budget committee recommendations, how we got here or why we're here right now? You know, I'm actually going to need you to come to the podium so that the people that are at home will be able to hear your question.
So I'm seeing budgeting for sewer and roads, and did I also see something on water mains, stuff like that?
Water.
So my question is, are there any other big infrastructure issues that we aren't addressing currently that we're just like, we'll get to that when we get to it?
Water mains are addressed when the roads are reconstructed. That's part of that whole process. And then the only other large infrastructure project would be our city facilities. If they ever got to a point where they were obsolete and it wasn't worth putting the money into it. In fact, we had to take the Parks building down on 11 Mile Road because it was just determined to be a hazard and no longer safe. So it actually was demolished. So, but we're not at that critical point yet with the buildings.
Okay, so the conversation we're having right now, we're not going to be revisiting in another year or two? Is that the opinion of the consultants on the board, do you think?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Claire?
Claire, go ahead. I don't know if this is the appropriate time or not. In terms of covering our cost of water and sewer, I don't understand why the city is not doing a larger ready-to-serve fee, or call it whatever you want, increasing that $17 so that the burden doesn't fall exclusively on usage, since we have residents who go away for the summer, go away for the winter, so they're not paying into it. Whether they use the water or not, they expect to come home and turn their faucet on and flush their toilet and have the system work. One of the problems with only doing it on water, one, water usage goes down, and secondly, it isn't shared by everyone.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that actually was the recommendation of the Long Range Budget Committee, was to do a flat rate. But in discussions with our city attorney, there have been a number of lawsuits brought against cities for not charging a proportional rate for the service. And so we did not want to be caught in a lawsuit where somebody could claim that a high user was paying the same amount as a low user, and that they weren't getting that proportionate benefit.
But the infrastructure is used by everyone. Virtually all of our neighbors have a fairly substantial ready-to-serve charge, and our sewer rate coming from the county is figured exactly that way, as a set rate. So while I understand that there's some concerns about Bolt, I really wonder why we seem to be the only entity that doesn't want to do this when you have it all over the place. I mean, I understand Pleasant Ridge, I believe, is $125 per quarter.
Right, there is the ready-to-serve charge for having the system be in an operating condition, but this was to make a bond payment. So it was a little different application or usage of that money. So again, the legal opinion was if you're going to bond for it and charge residents, it needed to be proportional. And I agree with you, and the budget committee agreed with you too, but given the legal opinion, the city commission felt that they were forced to go into
I would suggest that somebody look at it again, because I really think that you will see, one, water rates go down, water usage go down, and secondly, it is an unfair burden on those who are here in town and are using their water.
I just want to point out that as we were advised by the city attorney, there's 4 recent state Supreme Court cases on this issue, and the city's lost in every case. So, yes, on proportional charges related to issuing bonds and then repaying them from a water fund. They have to be proportional. They can't be flat rate. East Lansing was one of them, one of the most recent losers in the case. So,
Anything else? We do have some seats up here for the people in the back. If you want to, we have 3. Okay. All right, James, you want to do PowerPoint number 2?
Thank you very much. Our position this morning has been developed with assistance from the Long Range Budget Committee, and as was mentioned by the city manager, acknowledging them and their work is something that the community really is indebted to. They really helped us in developing the suggestions that would fit Huntington Woods. We can look at costs, we can look at road conditions, we can do that from our desks, but until we were here with the committee and working through their specific concerns for specifically Huntington Woods, that is what allowed us to bring the recommendations together that we'll present to you this evening. The first, Cheryl will introduce herself. My name is James Vitrano, and I'm a financial consultant for municipalities with some experience as a city manager in other communities before I hung my own shingle as a consultant, and I also teach at Rochester University. I'll be doing the second part of the presentation, and I'll ask Cheryl to introduce herself and start our presentation.
Good evening. My name is Cheryl Gregory. I'm a professional engineer with Rowe Professional Services Company, and I've been working with the city and the committee, as well as James, in helping to assess the pavement condition throughout the city, both on the asphalt and the concrete. So we initially did the PACER analysis back in 2018, and the next slides will discuss what we found and how we analyzed it, and some of the modeling we did to come up with scenarios for best funding improvements long-term for the road system in Huntington Woods. So the comprehensive strategy, it's a very sophisticated asset management plan is what it is. It starts with inventorying the assets that you have right now and documenting the condition, and then coming up with an idea of the rate of deterioration of each road, because concrete deteriorates differently than asphalt, but it's also dependent on the volume, the traffic volume that you have. So obviously the heavier traffic volume and loads, the faster it deteriorates, and your pavement designs reflect that. So back in 2018, in November, only about 15 months ago, we put eyes on every single square yard of pavement you have here in the city, and we came up with what we call an overall condition index, an OCI. And what we discovered was overall the city's rating is a little over 5.093, and that's on a scale of 1 to 10. But then we took it a little bit deeper, and we looked at, okay, well, your concrete pavement is obviously maintained and funded differently than your interior asphalt residential streets. So we separated that out, and what we came up with was, obviously the concrete roads are in better condition, and you can tell that yourself, at 6.76 on the OCI 1 to 10 scale, and the asphalt roads were lower at 4.7. So approaching poor, and some of them are very poor, as you know, in the residential area. The graphic that James is showing here now, that's up on the screen, is a color-coded map that shows kind of a heat map, if you will, where it's pink or red. Those are the poor or very poor, and yeah, failed. Some of them are, and then the better ones are the blue and the greens. Those are the good and very good roads.
Just a quick question, is there a breakdown between what's concrete and what's asphalt?
Everything on this map, on the interior is asphalt. The only concrete roads in the city are 11 Mile Road, Coolidge, and the Service Drive. Everything
Okay, so
else is
basically the entire city is asphalt.
pretty much. So once we got that in place, then we started to do the analysis. And there's really sophisticated software that we can use now where we can model the deterioration rates of pavement, so we can start projecting what's going to happen in the future. Yeah, we know something is in poor condition, or even fair condition, but it's important for us to model the network as a whole to understand what kind of effort, what kind of resources it takes to keep it at that condition, to make it better, or if you don't invest it, how quickly does it continue to deteriorate to poor. And the graph that is up on the screen now, it shows generally the behavior of the pavement life. So there's a point in its deterioration life at a rating of about 5.7. We consider that a critical point, and that's where basically the rate of deterioration starts to really tank. It starts to really go down. Up above 5.7, it's in good enough condition where you can provide maintenance, you can do intermediate rehabilitation to keep it up above 5.7. Once it falls below 5.7, I like to say you're throwing good money after bad roads. So the goal, it's less efficient. It's not that you don't do anything to those roads, it's just less efficient. So the goal is to maintain as much as possible above 5.7. It's more cost effective, and you end up raising your overall condition index across the whole network much more efficiently. In general, I guess I should point out, once you fall below that 5.7, it usually costs about 4 times as much. If you can maintain your road with intermediate fixes, for $1, it costs you $4 more if you have to do it after 5.7. It's just a rule of thumb. So, the goal was to look at a strategy using our software to model a funding scenario that generated an overall condition index of 5.7 or better, right? So that allowed you to create a sustainable road network with different funding scenarios. So we looked at the infrastructure, the multiple funding scenarios with James, and the potential for bonding or how you would generate other revenue sources. And we looked at actually 9 different scenarios. With the software, you can look at infinite numbers. But we generated 9 different scenarios and then mapped it so that you could get an idea. And there's another slide that James is going to get to. But we looked at 9 and defined them based on how much would go up front into the program and then how much would be maintained annually. And that's where James is going to, if you could go back one.
I just told him to go, but
Okay.
we'll have you go up and down. Right there. Thank you, Cheryl. So the goal, and Huntington Woods is not unlike most communities, and worst first fixes is what we've done for years in cities in Michigan. A road is failing, it's the worst one in your community, and that's the one that gets totally rebuilt. Well, you wait and another road fails to deterioration, and then that's the one that gets rebuilt. The strategy that Cheryl tested and that we're recommending is much more of a mix of fixes so that your overall asphalt condition is a 5.7, as opposed to having a few roads that are at a 9 and a 10, and a bunch that are failing consistently until they get to a 2, and then they come up to a 10. That's a very expensive scenario to follow, but it's what we've done often in local governments. This would have you spend dollars on things like crack sealing and overlays on those roads that are in that 3 to 5 to 6 condition so that they can stay above that 5.7 for a longer period of time. And if you can stay consistent in that maintenance, then they deteriorate less. Well, they deteriorate less, but the most important piece is that you don't go all the way to that 2 and 3 consistently on your roads, which requires 4 times the cost to repair. As mentioned, 9 scenarios were reviewed with the committee, and the committee did really good work in really digging into each of the scenarios. I'll talk about the 4 that kind of captured the attention. The next slide provides a little bit of a graphic of it. The first one was to continue to spend the same amount. And these are all 20-year scenarios. So the goal was to get the community to 5.7 or better at year 20. So this is not a presentation that we're going to say, we have a solution for you, and in 2 years your roads are going to be in exceptional condition. That's not financially possible. All the scenarios are 20-year scenarios. The first one, you spend about $166,000 per year on maintaining your roads, whether some type of maintenance activity. If you did that at year 20, your OCI would be down at 3.6, so it would fall considerably if you only spent that same $166,000 each year. We also looked at a scenario where you continued to spend $166,000 each year, but you spent $9 million up front. And that would get you almost there at a 5.1. The important piece to see here as we progress, the amount you spend up front is important so you can get some of your worst failing roads and get some injection into those roads that need to get saved early. But the more important number is that consistent amount each year that you can invest in your roads. A6 up there was getting that annual amount way up to $765,000 with no injection up front. That gets you well over a 5.7, but it's also the most expensive of your scenario, and you continue to have some seriously deficient roads in those early years. The yellow is increase that annual to $765,000 for 10 years and then level off to something lower in the second 10 years. That gets us about where we need to be. But again, it doesn't get you that early injection of funds that addresses some of the most critical roads. The scenario that ultimately the committee recommends and that we move forward on is A9. You can go to the next. And that is increase from $166,000 per year to $400,000 per year and inject $4.5 million over the first 3 years. And I'll stand and project into the mic. This is a relatively busy chart, but these show you the scenarios I just offered. This would be your do nothing scenario. That's the navy blue. The dotted line is that kind of number, that 5.7, that if at the end here you can get to 5.7, that you can continue to maintain your roads at a consistent rate afterwards. The blue line is the one that was suggested. It gets you over a 5.7 in those early years, and then that $400,000 keeps you pretty flat for the outgoing years. And you can see the number goes up and down slightly on the year depending on which roads are being repaired. The model is so sophisticated that there's actually roads in there being fixed at certain levels based on their deterioration rate. It's pointing upward or it's trending upward. So the hope is after that 20 years, or the expectation, I should say, after the 20 years is that $400,000 per year is what you need as a community to continue to maintain your roads at that average condition of a 5.7 or higher. I've probably addressed most of that. Those were the amounts you need. At the end of the analysis, the city will need $4.5 million in the first 3 years, which would be obtained through a bond issuance, and the annual debt on that's about $331,000 annually for the 20-year period. And you want to increase from $166,000 to $400,000 starting in that first year of the program, going out for the 20 years. So that's an additional $234,000 that the community would need to dedicate to roads, for a combination, or for a combined total of about $565,000 is the amount per year that we worked with the committee on to say, okay, now we know what we can fund and how much it's going to cost. The next part of my presentation and of the analysis was how to go about finding the funding, since you are at your at the place you are with your taxable value, your Headley adjustments. And this is where some of the other committees that were working on your long-term budget assisted and said there were options that the city could consider. We'll go one more. So an option for funding, and this is where roads ties into public safety, was to consider Public Act 345, which the city had discussed even prior to doing the road study. Public Act 345, and I'm going to step away from roads for a second and focus solely on that act, provides for firefighters and police officers' retirement funding. So that act allows a municipality or the voters of a municipality to specifically adopt a millage to fund the pension costs of its public safety workers. Currently, your public safety pensions are funded just through your general fund. So it is funded like every other expense in the city. What the act allows is a city to vote and say, we're going to pull that out of our general fund, not fund it through the Headley, or I'm sorry, not through your general millage, which is subject to being reduced by Headley, but instead funding it through an Act 345 millage, which is not subject to being reduced by Headley, and which actually is created to fund the pension amount that's required for your public safety officers. It's one of the very few ways that a municipality can raise additional revenue through voted millages. So you currently have your public safety pension plan, and your annual contribution from the general fund is about $800,000 to that fund to fund your public safety pensions. You have other pensions that are being funded by your government. That's only the amount that's related to public safety. The cost will continue to grow in future years. The general fund savings, if you were to not have to fund that $800,000 from the general fund, instead it'd be funded by a voted millage, that would be a savings amount that could be utilized for other allowable actions of the city, which in this case we're suggesting if you want to implement the road plans, that is one way that you could fund the savings in your general fund and utilize that money to improve your road infrastructure and choose to fund your pension through this PA 345 option. If the city wishes to pursue this, the actions would be needed to establish an Act 345 pension board and set a maximum levy for funding those pensions. Those have to be voter approved. So those would be on the ballot, and I believe the March 10th ballot, correct?
Yes.
The March 10th ballot to ask the voters if they would like to establish this Act 345 millage used specifically and only to fund your public safety pensions. If that is approved by the voters, then internally the city would take some action to move that pension fund into an Act 345 allowable pension fund and hire an investment manager, which can be and likely will be the same investment manager that has maintained these pension funds for your public safety officers since they were established, which is MERS, the same plan administrator. I'll explain this more than refer to it. If we combine the numbers I provided at the beginning of the presentation for roads and with the amount that you can generate from your public safety potential millage, you need $565,000 in new funding to implement a road infrastructure plan that would allow you to maintain your roads at a level that was explained by Cheryl. The savings that you can generate from an Act 345 pension millage would be about $800,000. So through establishing the millage and by act of your city council and declaration of their policy to utilize that funding that would be freed up and no longer having to be spent by your general fund for public safety pension, you could fund the road plan as presented. The total, this is kind of the small and stuck on the bottom yet important. This goes over what I had just explained. There's a remaining $235,000 that could be saved in the general fund if that levy was passed for the public safety pension to fund the whole $800,000. The city also has the city also has pension obligations and pension liabilities and other long-term liabilities for its non-public safety employees, which that funding could also address. It can also be utilized, depending on the policies set by your city council, for other infrastructure needs that are apparent to the city, whether that's buildings or whichever infrastructure priorities are important to you and your community during that budget year. But it is also really important to remember this PA Act 345 will lock box and guarantee your public safety pensions, but you still have a number of pensions in the community that aren't specifically police, fire, public safety that will need to be continue funded by the general fund. I'll just spend about 30 seconds wrapping this up as best as I can. I understand that I threw a lot of numbers at you, and I took two things that are seemingly unrelated, your road infrastructure concerns and need to address your road infrastructure with your public safety pensions. The reason that those two things ultimately became related by the long-term budget committee was there are very few ways for a community based on Michigan law to increase millages for things like road infrastructure. One of the things that the legislature has provided you an opportunity to do is to raise a millage for your public safety pensions. If you do that, you relieve your general fund, money that you can spend on roads, from needing to fund pensions. The pensions instead are funded by a voted millage, and then that funding, through the policy of your elected officials, can be utilized to fund your road plan. I hope that I've improved your understanding of this and not made it more confusing, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have on that presentation.
I want to just piggyback on that based on some of the questions that I've gotten since I sent out the FAQ. And one of the questions I get is, why don't you just bond for the road repairs like we've done in the past? So if you take the road strategy and you break it down into two parts, one part is the road reconstruction, that's the $4.5 million bond. That we could go to the voters and say, do you want to approve this bond? The payments will be X amount of dollars a year and we'll get those road reconstructed. Where we don't have a revenue source is for that $234,000 for the additional road maintenance. We are levying our maximum right now in our millage. We don't have any room to increase the road maintenance budget by $234,000. And it is something that cannot be levied. It's not a bond, so it can't be levied outside of that millage cap. So that's the crux that we're in, is where do we get the money for the additional maintenance? Because if we don't do the additional maintenance, you saw on one of the scenarios there that we just do the same routine we're in right now, where the roads deteriorate, then we build them up, and then they deteriorate when we build them up. So this is a totally different strategy, requires some additional maintenance dollars, but the impact will be better roads over a longer period of time.
And I can add to that if you don't mind. So if you can go out for a debt millage for that first infrastructure funding, as Amy suggests, and you're going to get one of these spikes right here, and you'll be above 5.7. And then you'll pay off that bond, but you won't have additional funding. You'll come back and only spend $166,000 per year. Your roads are going to deteriorate back down here. And somewhere 5 to 10 years out from now, which is what you've done as a community in the past, you'll get another bond and pay it off. And then you'll come back down here and have deteriorating roads again. And then and that is a cycle that we would hope that the community would consider not entering or re-entering in. And the only way to not re-enter a cycle like that is to have a consistent funding source dedicated to roads so that year over year you can maintain them.
So my next presentation, and the last one, will be actually on the fire police pension millage, how it works, what the impact will be. But before I get to that, are there questions about the road strategy itself and what we're attempting to do? Gordy, you want to step to the microphone so residents at home can hear?
Good evening. 2 parts is the resources that are going to take to do a 20-year outlook, excuse me, and plan. You've got commodities, you've got labor, you've got everything that's involved in doing a project like this. Have you, and if you have, what have you factored in for price increases that are inevitable? So I haven't heard that. We're looking at the same amount of dollars for 20 years when it's likely not going to be the same amount of dollars for 20 years. That's the first part. Second part is what assurances have you given us that if we do allocate the funding out of the general budget for the roads, that in fact in 5 or 10 years, that funding will in fact go to the roads, and then things don't switch up and say, well, now we really need a new fire truck or whatever it is you may be. So we're looking at 20 years of roads. I didn't see any assurances that it's specifically and guaranteed to go to that. So
Cheryl, can you handle the first question?
Yes, I can. So when we did the analysis for 20 years, we factored in inflation as well as engineering costs. So in addition to just the construction for the labor and materials, we also factored in the engineering that would be required, and that also includes updating this. This is a live, a rolling program. So every year you put in your new PACER, or every other year you put in your PACER data, and then you have a little bit of flexibility in which roads you pick based on utility work, perhaps. You don't want to repave a new project if you know a new road, if you know that there's going to be utility work. So it gives the city some flexibility there. But we did include engineering and inflation in the 20-year program.
All right, so question number 2 is another question I get a lot. Can we go to the slide or at the very bottom where it showed the 3 money, how much money was for, next one. Okay. So I did get quite a few questions about how do we know that if this bond is approved and it pays for pension that you're really going to spend the money on roads, right? So let's look at there's 3 buckets for that $800,000 that could be redirected from the public safety pension. The first one is the bond payment of $331,000. That's the $4.5 million bond. The City Commission has taken all the steps that it needs to take in order to sell those bonds. If the millage is approved in March, we intend to sell the bonds in April along with the sewer bonds so that we save some money on not having 2 bond sales. And so that for sure the City Commission can commit that out of the redirected funds from the pension, the bond payment is going to come out of that. So the 331. The bond sale will go through in April, assuming it passes, and that'll be committed. The $234,000 toward road maintenance, that is something that the city cannot commit future councils to how they're going to spend their money in the future. And that $234,000 is on average what we're going to spend on road maintenance. Some years it's going to be a little bit less, but we bank some money for a bigger project, and then those years it'll be a bigger project. So it's not something that the commission has the authority to say, for the next 20 years, we're going to put that $234,000 toward, X, Y, and Z, because that number will fluctuate and it's not legal to obligate future commissions. But the commission can tell you that it is their intent to follow through on this, that this is the whole reason for this Public Act 345 millage strategy, is to get the money to do the road improvements. And so ultimately, it will be the voters that will be holding the city commission responsible for meeting the obligation for the roads. So then I get asked about, well, what about that $235,000? What's that going to be spent on? And that, again, is something that will be done, decided on an annual basis. There are a number of worthy causes, if you will, for that money. One scenario is that the city commission uses that money and puts it toward the public safety pension, so that Act 345 millage will be lower, because we don't need as much money, because we're taking some of the money in the general fund to pay for public safety pensions. Another opportunity would be to take that extra money and make an additional payment toward the public safety pension, because then the amount of money that needs to be funded shrinks faster, and then the city needs to levy that millage over a shorter period of time, because it's like paying your mortgage off quicker, putting some extra money toward your mortgage. We also have, as James mentioned, liabilities for retiree health insurance. The state, within the last couple of years, has determined that cities need to pay upfront for health insurance for our retirees, much like they want us to upload the payments for pensions. That's relatively new, so we have not made a lot of strides in putting money toward those health insurance payments. A fourth bucket could be, we decide that the roof. Who was it that said there's something on the short-term horizon in terms of infrastructure? We're not aware of anything right now, but 5-10 years from now, the city hall roof, structure is such that it needs to be a total rehab. Then the money could go to that. So there are a lot of different ways that money could be spent. Again, it's something that this commission cannot commit future commissions to, but you will ultimately, as the voters, be responsible for deciding whether or not the city commission has used that money or allocated that money in a responsible and fiscally efficient way. Did that answer your two questions?
No.
No? Okay.
Sorry. No, I
Did you?
Okay. Do I need to get up? I guess so. So the first part of this presentation was to take the $800,000 and use it for the roads. Unless I'm not hearing or understanding, am I correct about that?
The goal was to identify $565,000 specifically for the road plan that was identified as A9. The funding mechanism that's available for it would generate $800,000. Now it's up to the commission and the community regarding that last part, which Amy has specifically addressed. You can pay down that pension faster. You can do other, to your point in the question, you can fund other needs of the city. Or the city commission could address it by reducing that millage that would be levied to fund the public safety pension. That public safety pension is set each year, the amount that mill will be, based on the needs of the fund. So in one year, you could have a certain number of mills, and the stock market does really well in the next 2 or 3 years, and those mills could come down. Or the stock market could do poorly, and then you would need more mills. This could also balance some of that out from that millage amount. The only lockbox, if you will, for roads is that first number, because the city will be obligated to its bondholders to pay it back.
Okay, so I guess maybe I did misunderstand, because the 565 is for the roads, is what I'm reading that right now. Okay, so it's not the 800. So there's some 200 and whatever the math is. I don't have my glasses.
235.
So, okay, so 235. So we're looking at a non-guarantee. We're trying to be, it sounds like we're trying to have explained to us, to convince us to buy into this. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but this is what we're looking at, and this is a vehicle to do it. But there's absolutely no guarantee other than human accountability, which may or may not be there, and the only recourse is to vote these people out. I mean, government moves slower than, it's just the way it works. So I guess I came in with a whole different idea of what the intent was, and the intent was to take the money out of the general fund, put it toward the roads, because we can levy another millage with the pension fund. But I'm seeing that there's a lot more fluidity in that, if I'm understanding it correctly.
So what I'd like to do, because we're getting a little off track
Yeah, okay,
here, is-
I'll stop. I'm not trying to drill.
There's another part, I'm going to talk about the actual public safety pension, but, so are there I want to talk about the road strategy so that we stay on track.
So
Sorry, I need you to come to the microphone because
sorry.
we're taping this.
So you talked about the I'll just call it the 5-7 number, where good roads, bad roads, let's make it simple. Can you just talk a little bit about communities where this has been successful in terms of upgrading roads that we might be able to take a look at as residents to understand how better that's going to improve our lives? I don't think Berkeley's done it, but I'm sure there are some other communities in Michigan. Can you talk a little bit about that?
The one that comes to mind is the city of Livonia.
Okay.
We've been doing this for about 12 years.
Okay.
And statewide at various levels, in the late 90s, early 2000s, when there was a lot of bond money coming in, the goal was to keep everything over 80 to 85% good or fair. But then the funding went away, and that's where we're at today statewide.
Okay.
But there are communities that have been doing this for some time.
Sue?
I have two questions. Number one, approximately how much did it cost to do what you did at the intersection of York and Hendry and Boardman? And that whole thing that took a few
We
months.
did that with another road project. Do you remember what the bond was for that one?
I don't remember offhand now. I mean, I can look it up and get it to you.
That was one question, just so that we could kind of get a picture of how much it costs to do just
Sure.
that much. My other question is, are there any other materials besides concrete and asphalt that can be used that might have more longevity? For example, and I haven't been there in a while yet, but in Arizona, they use recycled tires to surface. They recycle tires and use that.
We
To
have
pave.
used, we have mixed designs, hot mix, asphalt mix designs that also incorporate rubber or asphalt. We've found through experience that it doesn't work very well in our climate.
Okay, that's
So-
what I didn't know.
Yeah, so, but we do use recycled asphalt pavements, remixing
Uh-huh.
it and rehabilitate it into new pavements. So there are more efficient and recycled materials that are being used, and we would recommend that.
Okay, thanks.
All right, another road question.
Yeah, I have a general question which is motivated by looking at our tax bill and discovering that these cumulative road-related millages cost us about $538, and based on our projection for our house, that would be another $362. So that would give it $900 just for roads, which is significant. And I am appalled by the data that you showed earlier on one of the slides, that these asphalt roads don't only last 5 years. Now,
No.
what's that? There was a projection in the lower corner for asphalt, and
I think maybe those were ratings.
were those number ratings that you're talking about? The five? What is the lifetime of an asphalt road?
Though, that was the overall condition index, that was.
No, that wasn't the one I was referring to. It was earlier, an earlier slide. Thought I had that. Asphalt? Okay, well, maybe not. In any case, I'd like to know whether you have looked at other, you mentioned Livonia, for instance, whether you have looked at other locations in Michigan which do better with the roads, and I would say even maybe outstate if necessary, because I know Wisconsin has excellent asphalt roads that last a long time, and I can't understand why Michigan can't match that. And in addition, I'm concerned that you need to demonstrate that we do have best practice here by providing a bit of information about these other communities, and not just present this particular support for the approach to generate the additional revenue from other sources. In other words, a roundabout, which I can appreciate. I don't complain about that. But I think fundamentally what was just mentioned by somebody else, there are other technologies you mentioned. The weather isn't right here. Well, the fact is that we have supported the road building industry for many, many years and let them do and let them tell us whatever they do. But I don't believe due diligence has been done on best practice in road construction. And that's what we deserve for what we pay in taxes in Huntington Woods. Thanks.
All right, road questions? All right, so the last part of the PowerPoint is going to be on the fire and police pension millage, because it is something new. This Public Act 345, which is, again, the vehicle to be able to raise revenue outside the millage cap. There's two other millages that we are aware of where you can go outside the millage cap. One is the sanitation millage for rubbish and recycling pickup, which we do levy. You'll see that as a separate line item on your tax bill. And the other item is a dedicated millage toward libraries, operations, but if we did that, then the city commission would need to appoint a separate library governing board who would have authority over the library. So this is the third type of millage that can be levied outside of the pension. A number of communities levy it. Oak Park, Berkeley, Madison Heights are some communities around here, and there's an additional 33 in the state of Michigan. It does provide certainty for meeting pension obligations for our public safety retirees who do not receive Social Security. And because it's a new millage, it must be voted on and approved by taxpayers. The city placed the fire police pension on the March 10th ballot to be collected beginning in July. I did get a question from a resident who wanted to know why we didn't put it on the November ballot. And the reasoning was that if we put it on the November ballot, we wouldn't be able to levy the first millage if it was approved until July of 2021. And so we lose a year of construction. And given the fact that the March ballot is a presidential primary, we were optimistic that voter turnout is going to be high, like most of our elections are. So that's why it went on the March ballot. We did work with our pension management fund, and they gave us an estimate of how many mills they thought we would need to levy, assuming taxable value went up 2% every year, to fully fund the defined benefit portion of the pension plan in 20 years. And I'll show you a graph or a slide in a minute that shows you that fluctuated. But the high was 2.7 mills, the low was a little less than 1, and so the city commission set the maximum millage that could be levied at 3 mills in case things go south, the economy tanks, taxable values go down, and, we need to raise more mills than assumed because we didn't hit that 2% growth in taxable value. The pension millage as on the ballot can be collected for no more than 25 years. As I said, March 10th is the presidential primary. Voters can select a Republican ballot, a Democrat ballot, or a ballot without a presidential primary option. And the DIA renewal is also on the ballot. So these are the estimates from our retirement management firm or administrator, thank you, on the millage. So you could see the 2.4 is what they estimated needed to be collected in 2020. Actually, now that we have some more updated numbers, it's going to be slightly less than that. Can you go back? Slightly less than the 2.4, but then you can see year by year where back all the way down to 2037, it drops below 1 mil. Okay, next one. And the average over the 25 years, or 20 years, I'm sorry, is 2.1114. Again, it assumes a 2% increase in taxable value. Our estimates for the millage that will be levied in July is actually 2.2633, not the 2.4. And we do have a tax calculator on our website where you can put in the taxable value of your home, and there's instructions on how to find what your taxable value is. And it does use the higher 2.416 estimate, and it will tell you what the impact will be on your tax bill. So the road improvement, because we wanted to be able to assure the residents that if they approve the millage that we were going to do road improvements, we have asked our engineers to start designing roads, and the first 6 have been identified and are being designed right now so that construction could start this summer. The roads that we have selected as roads that have both water main issues and are in poor repair. Now, this is not $4.5 million worth of repairs. I think it's about $3.5 million worth of repairs. We have not identified the roads that would be done in the second phase because we don't know how much money will be left over after the first phase is constructed. I think I just went over all of that, and that is the end of the presentation on the pension millage impact, and then the roads that are being designed so that we could put out a bid and get those constructed if the millage passes. That wraps up my presentation. Joe or Bob or Michelle, do you have anything to add or that I haven't? And then we'll do questions.
One of the questions that was brought up is what is the intent of the city commission to do with these dollars that are being raised by not having the general fund the pension programs currently? And it is our intent. We have expressed that all along, right after the financial committee gave us their report, that this money is to be used for infrastructure. And the other looming issue that we have, which is our long-term pension and health insurance liabilities for our retirees. So that is our commitment, and as the city manager said, we can't there isn't any way to hold a future commission to a budget other than the current commission. So the only way the citizens have to hold us to that is by your vote to elect commissioners. And all I can do is express it is absolutely our intent to do this. And yes, if we don't do it that way, I'm right with you. We should be removed from office.
And I would just like to add, there is a public process annually for our budget. It is open to the public. We've worked with the committee, the Long Range Plan Committee this year because of these long-term issues, but the annual budget setting process is open, And we are up here because we're here to represent you and the good of the community and our future. And with the limited amount of resources that we have because of what, state laws dictate, we saw this as a creative way to ensure that we have roads, because at the end of the day, if the roads suffer and decline and get into a really bad situation, how much does it cost to fix your car when you get a pothole? Think about that. You can hold us accountable, and I really welcome you to contact any of us all the time if you need to, but certainly if you're concerned about how we're spending the budget in the general fund, it is a public process, and I really would encourage you to continue to talk with me, Bob, Joe, the others, and any future commissioner who sits up here.
I want to let folks know, too, that we've taken steps to control costs as best that we can. We stopped the defined benefit pension for general employees a long time ago. We negotiated with the Public Works Union to stop that defined benefit pension and switch it to a 401-style retirement. We recently negotiated with the public safety officers to stop that pension for new hires, and so that system is now closed. We've also capped the amount of overtime that public safety officers can roll into their pension and union negotiations. In their final years of employment, they were rolling in a lot of overtime, which was boosting their pension payment and really harming the pension fund. So the union agreed to our requests in negotiations. So we've taken a lot of steps to control the public safety pension costs and all pension costs for the city, frankly. But what we're finding is we're still at a funding level that is not adequate. But now that the system is closed, within 25 years, we can have it completely funded and shored up and fix the roads. And I can tell you the number one email or call that I get from residents is about roads. Constantly complaints about roads. And so it's on my radar. I mean, that is where the money is going to go. It's to fix roads. It's the number one concern that I hear about. So I agree with what my colleague said. We can't adopt some ordinance that binds future commissions. They could repeal the ordinance. There's nothing we can really do. But a large chunk of that $800,000 is a bond payment that we can't avoid. So we're only talking about a portion of that that's not guaranteed. So what do we, how do we handle that? And as long as I'm up here, that's where it's going. That's what I can tell you. So.
The other thing that we didn't mention in the presentation is that not only is there a 3 mil cap that we elected to put on this as a commission, but you can only levy the amount of money that is paid annually or required to be paid annually into the pension fund. So that dollar amount is set by MERS each year, and that determines the amount of money that can be levied to the community. So there's 2 caps in place. There's that dollar amount, and we put the 3 mil cap on there, self-imposed, so that it would never go above that. Actually, the Long Range Financial Study Committee actually recommended 5 mils. We thought that was too much. We lowered that to 3 mils when we were writing the ballot language.
So
Yes.
Joe has sort of, I think, partially answered my question. And again, it's in the spirit of no surprises. So I wanted to better understand exactly what our pension liability is, what the percentage of liability we have in terms of the defined benefit pension, as well as what percent of our employees are on the defined contribution pension program. So I think that would be helpful, that we'd have some assurance, given the track record of previous administration, that we're not going to have a lot of surprises. So you sort of partially answered that, but if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
So the pension plan is about 60% funded, and all the non-public safety employees are on the defined contribution plan. They have been since 1996. Actually, any employee that was hired prior to 1996 is on the defined benefit. Everybody hired after that is on the defined contribution. Any new hires in public safety after 2017 are on defined contribution. We have hired 1 public safety officer since then, and we hired another one today, as a matter of fact. So 2 out of our 17 employees in public safety are on defined contribution, and the rest are on defined benefit.
I can also add that I've been on the commission for 23 years, and every one of those 23 years, we have fully funded the pension liability that was determined for that year. In some years, we have gone above that. As a matter of fact,
Since I've been
5-6 years ago, we made an additional $1 million payment to the pension fund. It's always something we've taken very seriously. Unfortunately, even though these numbers were given to us as the proper amount to fund annually, we find ourselves in this shortage.
I think, too, that the biggest contributor to the shortage is there were 4 recent changes that the pension fund, pension administrator was required to undertake, all mostly due to results, changes in state law. The assumed rate of investment return was lowered. So we were assuming a certain rate of investment return, that was lowered. We had to update the mortality table to recognize that people are living longer and will be making pension payments longer. There were a number of things that were forced on us that really dragged down our funding level, that were kind of hit us all at once. So that's how we ended up at 60%. But despite, as the mayor said, us putting additional money aside each year.
Can you step up to the microphone?
So I find it unusual you say there's a portion of that money that is unaccounted for that we can't think. It's 29.3%. That's a large portion of the money that you're going to take. But I'll leave it at that. But let me just read this. 2010 City Street, 2012 City Street, 2014 City Street, 2017 City Street, 2019 sewer bonds. That is my summer tax bill. I heard what you said, but you have a pattern of putting everything on the summer tax bill. My summer taxes are going to be $13,000 this year. My winter ones are $600. Now, I understand what you said. If you lose the year of construction, I anticipated that as an answer. But clearly, they've shown a pattern of either not paying attention to that, and you just keep dumping. I mean, 19 times more my summer tax bill is to my winter bill. You know, it's a little difficult to pay. Why even have the December tax? I mean, you might as well just lump it all in the summer because it's insignificant. I understand you're not going to give up that money, but what's the point of keep putting it? And we're going to be here in 3 years talking about the same thing. And you have a pattern, so I can only assume it's going to keep going that way. There needs to be more foresight and to get these taxes spread out more evenly, because I'm sure people that pay their taxes not in an escrow are not thrilled with dumping $12,000 or whatever your tax bill is in the summer and have, pocket change go toward the December bill. To me, it makes no sense. And, it came right out 2020, and I heard your reasons why it's got to be done now, but there's been a pattern for over a decade that's really not sensitive to that.
I don't know the answer to that. I think what you're asking is, can the city millages be split between the summer and the winter bill? I don't know the answer to that. I will look into it. The other levies, the school district and Oakland Community College, of course, we don't have any control over when they levy that, but I'll be happy to take a look at at least splitting the summer and the winter.
We have control over all these bonds.
Yes.
City streets, those are the ones I'm talking about. I understand state obligations, but of the things we can control, there's no control.
All right.
It just happens.
A good question, and I don't know do you know the answer to that, James?
I'm pretty certain, though you should confirm, that the city has, certain entities have certain tax bills that they place their amounts to. And so I wonder if there are any city, specifically your city, taxes on that winter bill, or if those are only your school district or another entities. That may be one explanation to look into, that Huntington Woods is only allowed to place it on that one bill. That would be my
Just as a
my
follow-up, there are
suggestion.
other communities where the tax bills are split more equitably, certainly not a 19-to-1 ratio.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'd be happy to look into that. Yes.
My name's Sid Carden. I live in Vernon and Berkeley. So I support the plan for several reasons. First of all, I'm really glad that our police and firefighters will have a secure pension. When you have people that have a secure pension, they have a higher level of commitment to the city, and that translates into better services for the rest of us. I, of course, like the idea that the roads are going to be improved for the same reason. It makes the city a nicer, more livable city. And a lot of people have raised concerns about taxes, but we also need to think about property values. My property values have gone up. I didn't do anything to enhance my property this year. It went up because we're in a high-quality city. And in order to maintain a high-quality city, you have to have committed employees. You have to have good infrastructure programs. So I just don't like talking about taxes without talking about the fact that property values increase. And I would encourage us to not be penny wise and pound foolish. I'd like to see my property values continue to increase, and it's because that we're such a desirable, high livable city, and that involves paying taxes sometimes. Thank you.
Yes. Louise, right?
Thank you. I'm Louise Giles, and I live on Dundee at the very southern end of Huntington Woods. My next door neighbor is Royal Oak. And Amy, you spoke about the first phase of construction that's planned. How long is the first phase? What are we talking, 1 year, 2 years? What is that?
2 years, yeah.
Okay.
The entire project would take 3 years, but those are the roads that were reconstructed in the first 2 years.
And you haven't identified those roads that will go in the next phase. Okay, well, I just want to point out that our particular part of the city often gets overlooked because we're right next to Royal Oak. And our road is, on the very map you showed, it's failed. Okay. And you helped send some people to our section of the road and have the potholes filled. But you know that cold patch just lasts so long. And also, we always go on Dundee and turn onto Hendry, going over to Woodward. Mm-hmm. That portion of Hendry from Wareham to York is also in terrible shape. And I don't know who identifies these road projects, but please don't overlook us. We're often overlooked. Also, our street, Dundee, and I'm talking south of Hendry up to the Huntington Woods Park in Royal Oak, mm-hmm. and where Harridan slits off. Our road has had water main failures, water main breaks. So we fit the category. Our road has failed, we've had water main breaks, but we get overlooked because somehow we're half a block and nobody thinks of our section of the city. So please don't overlook us. And the other question I have, totally different subject, if I may, the pension board that's going to be set up to handle the police and fire pensions, providing the millage passes. What control do we have over that pension board? How will they be appointed? How will they be paid? There are a lot of pension boards, we only need to look to Detroit in the past, that have absconded with the funds, made very poor investments, and paid themselves exorbitant salaries. So how's that going to be controlled?
So the state law, Public Act 345, dictates who's appointed to the board. I think it's somebody from police, somebody from fire, somebody from the city commission, I think some residents. So that who gets appointed or type of people that are appointed is in the state law. Working with the union, we are committed to having the board meet, and that their first item of business will be to turn the management back to MERS, so that that money will actually never leave MERS. It'll stay within MERS.
And explain MERS again. I read what it is, I've forgotten.
Yep, MERS is the Michigan Employee Retirement System, mm-hmm. and they manage our pension system for our defined contribution, our defined benefit for all of our employees. They have ever since pensions were first established. So the intent is for them to continue to manage the plan, so we don't have to, as a city and as these appointees, take on management and investing of funds.
So
it would stay with the management, what is it called?
Municipal Employees Retirement System.
Yeah, but I mean the management.
Your plan administrator.
Administrator, yes.
So would the same administrator that is currently managing the fund?
Yes.
And how is that administrator paid?
It's a percentage of investments. And we're one of hundreds of clients, municipal clients that they manage funds for.
And then they contract out and hire the managers to manage the money.
Okay, well, it's just, it makes me a little uneasy.
It's status quo. Let's put it that way. Status quo
Okay.
with the management of the pension system.
Okay,
All right?
okay, very good, thank you.
Yeah.
If I might.
Sure.
I'm Dan Kramer. I live on Borgman. When I received the, and I hope I don't get this gentleman's tax bill instead of mine. But speaking of the total tax burden, I share a hair color with a number of other people visiting here with us this evening. Some of us have are past our peak earning years, where taxes become a significant yearly burden to us. I think in my particular case it was a $300 or $400 increase in taxes. But then I just heard mention of a possible or consideration of a library millage to be added on top of that.
No, that was an option that was considered because it would be something outside the cap, but the commission decided because it needs its own separate governing body not to go in that direction.
Okay, but that's at the present time, as you said, you can't commit a future a body to any course of action, so they may raise those taxes. My concern is that the amount of taxation that many of us are facing could make a decision for us to have to leave the city that we've been residents of for, God, I've been here since '82, so it's been a long time. My concern is that, yes, our roads are awful. As anybody who uses the city understands the roads are terrible, but I'm concerned about the overall tax burden to working residents like this gentleman behind us who has a very significant bill, and those of us who rely on, unearned income to stay in our homes. I would suggest that the city commission, proceed with great care, because I'm concerned about people being forced to leave the city against our will, but having no financial resources, we may be forced to leave, it's very sobering for some of us to look at the increase in these bills over time.
Yeah, the commission shares your concern. I'll let them speak to it. One of the reasons why we wanted to have this informational meeting was so that everybody clearly understood what is being proposed, what value you would get from that additional pension, because it is, although it is a pension millage, it is for better roads.
Thank you for your time.
Speak to tax burden at all, that you feel their pain?
Well, I think your comments are well taken. I mean, we, the four commissioners and the mayor, don't have an easy job, I can tell you that. Looking at what we're looking at, we're not flush with cash and have all this money to do all these things. I mean, we've done what we can to try to cut costs, and this is something that, I'm a taxpayer too, and I have to think about, how would I vote on this as a citizen at the ballot box, not just voting to put it before the citizens of the community. And this is something that, after a lot of thought, I've decided to buy into, and I'm going to vote for it, because I think that it really does two things. It fixes the pension issue, and it's going to fix the road issue. And so this is one that I think I'm going to get behind. I also, like the fact that it does have a ceiling on it. The number of mills is capped, and based on projections, we're never going to levy the full 3 mills. Sometimes it's as low as 2 or slightly above. So that was another thing that is kind of making me think, if we bonded for the whole road project, the levy could be sort of similar to what we're looking at potentially, because we'd have to do multiple bond issues, because when you bond for these road improvements, the improvements have to be done within a certain period of time. We couldn't sell bonds now and then use the money 15 years down the road to fund these repairs. So looking at it, this really did seem like the best course of action. And we did have a lot of residents from the community, a diverse group of residents, sort of representing all different, demographics and geographies and all different parts of the city and age groups and everything, to get feedback on this and look at these issues and say, tell us as residents what you think will work, and we'll study it, and then we'll take it to the residents, or we'll make these decisions to increase fees or cut programs or do what we have to do. So I'm going to support it, but I've given it a lot of thought because I have a tax bill too.
We did talk about this, and going back to a previous comment about how we levy a new bond every 3 to 5 years, or ask the residents for one to do total road reconstruction. We never saw an end to that cycle. We think that this is a better plan to get our roads in a better condition on a long-term basis.
All right, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to, and we had a conversation earlier today, and you mentioned in terms of the pension and talked about there were some mandatory changes that you had to make in terms of assumptions. And my understanding is your assumption return right now is 7.75% down from 8%. So what's the probability of that happening over the long term? And if you don't hit those assumptions, is that going to create a greater contribution that's going to be required to MERS over that 20 years?
MERS historically has said back in the 1920s to now that is the rate, 8%. But like you said, if there was something to happen in the future, they could potentially bring those rates up.
Right, but the idea that we are going to make 8% on that money over the next 20 years is probably not realistic. So, especially
There's
given where we are.
2 or 3, or we lose, or there's usually make 15. And they
Right.
think over 20 years that'll balance out.
Okay, but if we have a downturn like 2008, 2009, then all of those assumptions are going to be pretty much blown
That's why
out
they
of the
kept it
water.
at 3 mils, so we're not going to tax you for 15 mils or something ridiculous to make it up.
Right, but if we hit that 3 mils or we have a payment, then that's going to take away from that difference between the 350 and 800. It won't go towards roads, it'll go towards funding pension,
And
correct?
it's also important to remember that if the economy does go south and we need, to levy the, let's say, the 3 mils, taxable values probably will have dropped as well. So there is an offset with millage rate will be higher than we expected, but the taxable value will probably be lower than we anticipated. So the tax impact is not going to be necessarily your current taxable value, and all of a sudden we just impose, a 3 mil millage on it. There will be some offset with taxable value.
But we would be at the 3 mils, and a great percentage of that 800,000 would be going to fund the pension and not the roads, even though we would see the offset.
Well, the part of that money has to go toward the bond payment.
Right, the 350.
Yeah, so that
Right.
part is committed.
Okay, and then final question is, everything that we saw in the discussion was over 20 years, but the bond or the proposal is for 25. Can you speak to your thoughts on why you went out 5 years?
Sure, we did that, we recommended that because the assumptions that we received from our retirement administrator was that the pension plan would be paid off in 20 years. Just in case there are assumptions that are incorrect, we decided to go out at the 25 years. That does not mean that we have to levy it for 25 years. If in fact it's paid, if we were able to put additional money into the fund and we get to pay it off, it's paid off sooner, then we wouldn't levy that amount of money. In fact, that money is dedicated solely to public safety pensions. It can't be spent on anything else. So the 25 years is just a cushion in case the assumptions were overly optimistic in terms of fully funding the pension plan.
And just to your other point, I just want to clarify too that MERS uses a 5-year investment smoothing period. It used to be 10 years, but now it's 5. So if there's any year where the market just completely tanks and the bottom falls out, we're not going to be forced to have to levy the maximum millage. That particular year's investment return is average with the 4 prior years to lessen the impact that it would have. So we won't ever, unless the market was bad for, a 7-8 year sustained period of time, then there's no, benefit of the investment smoothing. But generally, one bad year won't affect the levy.
I'm Julius Tomaszewski. I'm actually living on one of these roads that's going to get fixed. But how much of our total road mileage in Huntington Woods does this first phase really represent?
I'm not sure. This is the first time I've seen the roads that were selected for the first phase. So off the top of my head, I don't know.
Okay. It doesn't seem like very much, to be honest. And then
I assume that there's also another list of roads that get the intermediate or maintenance fixes. And I think this is just for heavy maintenance.
That's just the reconstruction.
Yeah, so this is not the entire list. I don't think this is the entire list.
but
No, this is just the
the
reconstruction.
second phase is dependent on if there's any money left over.
Well, hopefully there'll be money left over.
Well, yeah,
We should have
everybody
about $1
does.
million
But
left.
like I said, this doesn't seem to represent a very good chunk of mileage
Well, part of the.
for what we're talking about paying.
There is a price per lineal foot, and this represents reconstruction of the road and new water mains. So it's twice the amount of work,
Now, do the water mains come out of a different fund, or is that, it's all combined?
comes out of this bond.
Okay. I agree with the gentleman. Their tax rate is pretty high right now, and this would really be a tipping point for a lot of people, including me. Thanks.
Sue? Oh, Bonnie, sorry. Bonnie.
I'm Bonnie Nowakowski, and I've lived here for about 40 years. I don't know that I'll be alive 20 years from now by the time this bond is paid off. But what I want to ask you is, what's the plan B if this doesn't go through?
Status quo,
Which is,
$166,000 a year on road maintenance.
and more bonds?
That will be up to a future commission to decide.
I'm not opposed to the idea of the bond going through, but I'm thinking it's actually a selling point for the bond going through by saying if we don't do it, what are we going to do? I mean, I live on a road that really could use some work, but we're not on the list. So, and I don't know if it'll be done in my lifetime anyway, but that's really my question. You brought up the point of how many bonds have been issued over these years to fix roads. Is that where we're going? More of these bonds and bonds and bonds? If we
Only
don't
if it
pass
doesn't
this
pass.
mileage?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, unless, the state of Michigan magically comes up with millions of dollars and decides to dedicate it toward roads. In fact, I had talked to a resident today about if we did get a sudden influx of cash toward roads and we could use that for road maintenance, then we wouldn't need to allocate the whole $800,000 to roads or the $565 toward roads. And we could lower the millage for the public safety obligation because we would have, money left over in the general fund since we got additional inflow of cash for roads. But I'm not banking on it. So better safe than sorry, and come up with a plan. And then if we do get some extra money from, if the infrastructure, what is it, the infrastructure week? If that actually becomes a thing and we get money, then we'll be able to use that money, fix the roads, and we won't have to levy the millage as high because, we'll be able to make the public safety pension obligation out of the general fund.
The other thing too is, I was just going to say the millages, the road millages that are on the current tax bill in the coming years will fall off because those bonds will be paid off and the tax bill will go down, and we don't anticipate issuing new bonds to replace them because under this A9 road plan, we don't have to do that. So the current tax bill that's allocated to roads in the coming years, as we pay those bonds off, those will wipe away from the tax bill. They'll disappear. And your overall tax bill will go down. Your tax burden will go down when that debt's paid off.
And in the past, as road bonds are paid off, that's when we've issued new bonds and done more road reconstruction and trying to keep the tax at about the same millage that it is currently.
Yes.
My name is Al Willett, and I live on York. And I went through the summer watching the reconstruction there and that intersection. And I know it cost a lot of money. But before that even happened, and, you related that a little bit, there were times when I would go out there and the pothole boy, or man, was out there fixing the pothole. And he said to me, this is the fourth time I fixed the same pothole. Well, obviously that road needs to be fixed. 4 times. That's over a number of years. Now that those trucks and machines have been on there for that whole year, our streets are pretty bad. The ones that they were working on, the big intersection, looks really nice. But now I can't get to the intersection very easily.
Because of the condition of the road?
Correct. And it's really chopped up. And we couldn't drive into Borgman from Woodward before without having a real major problem. So, I mean, those roads now need repair real quickly. One of them is going to get, at least on the major one, is going to get fixed, but the other ones, I'm very concerned. Very concerned.
All right, thank you. In the back.
Hi, my name is Brad Gabal. I live on Victoria, basically first point away there near 696. For fun, when you guys were running your scenarios there with your little charts, I assume that you have like miles that go in and out of the city, cars that go in and out. That's kind of make your scenarios of when like the asphalt will break down. Is that how you kind of do things when you make those estimates?
Right, we have what we call average daily counts, average daily traffic volumes,
Okay.
and annual traffic volumes as well. So we
Like the
use-
little strip that we go over when we drive over it, it counts it.
Right.
Right. Okay. So one of the things I like about living in Huntington Woods, and we've been here for 7 years now, is that I don't have a need for a car in the city because I can get here, I can walk to Burton and drop my son off in about 20 minutes. I can take a bike, 5 minutes. Did you guys run a scenario, and I'm just going to throw this out here, where the city banned cars and only allowed commercial vehicles? I know I'm just throwing it out there, but like I'm just throwing it out there because otherwise all I'm hearing, like I agree with the gentleman who said, like, if you raise my taxes, like if this goes through, I'll be forced out. Like we might be there too. And like and I'm hearing like the status quo, it'll just keep going on. Like that's not a solution. So I'm just throwing it out there. So like if you guys could run like a fun scenario and call like the Brad line on there just to see like what it would look like. I'm curious just to see like what it would look like, because living in the city here, it's like my thing. You ever see a guy like on an orange bike with kids on the back? Like that's me. I take them right to Burton, drop them off right in front. I do my best to not play musical cars with everyone else on that street there, because this is the city that we live in, and I feel like if we could embrace that, I know it would be a real change, and my friends make fun of me too, but like, I mean, that's why we liked living here. And really, I don't need a car for anything in the city. And I know like you'd have to change everyone's lives, but I'm just curious to see what the Brad line would look like on that, and see if the money that would be freed up for like the roads lasting longer could start paying back the old bonds. I'm just curious. It's like a starting point, and then it's like, well, maybe we'll allow this. I'm just curious.
Well, to answer your question, no, we didn't run a scenario like that, and it would be up to the city if they'd like us to investigate that.
Does it sound fun, Brad line? I got some thumbs up. I'm just throwing it out there because I'm just kind of seeing this. I don't want to just move forward and raise taxes right now if there's something out there that might be a solution without having to do it. So you guys wave at me on the orange bike if you see me, but.
Yes.
Larry Chesterman from Ludlow.
I'm assuming that we'd be able to issue a bond at a very low interest rate.
You know what the interest rate is?
Usually about around 3% right now.
How does that compare to the previous bond rates that we're currently paying off?
I think some of the older ones, I have to look back, but some of them are in the 4s and the 3s.
So, yeah, I was wondering if it would make sense to try to consolidate some of those older bonds if we have any higher interest rates. But if they're all in the 4 to 3% rate, it probably doesn't make sense to do so. But
We already
did refinance.
You've refinanced them? Seems like.
And then every time you refinance, you do all the closing costs. You have to factor that into it. It makes it worthwhile.
Yeah, it sounds as though that's already been worked on. Thank you.
Anybody else? Well, let's get, is there anybody who hasn't asked a question yet? Okay, yes, I thought there was somebody in the back.
My name is Gail Kovac, and I live on Borgman. One of my concerns is you had this committee that looked at everything, but you also had a committee 10 years ago who looked at a lot of all this stuff again. They looked at the roads. Nothing was done. These roads just didn't turn bad overnight. So was somebody not watching the hen house and doing their due diligence? That's my fiscal responsibility. I find that the city is not fiscally responsible. These roads didn't deteriorate overnight. So what happened for the last, we had our road on Scotia done 10 years ago. It might even be 20 years ago, Scotia all the way down right on Borgman. It is already falling apart. And what we were told is the cement curbs were not done correctly. So, you know, who's paying attention to what's going on? I live there, and I'm constantly calling the DPW to come and fill the holes. And this is one of the newer streets that got gutted from the bottom up. So I've lived here all my life. I grew up here all my life, but it's not the city that I remember. I just feel that whether it was the previous administration, I just feel financially your fiscal responsibility, nobody is paying attention and doing their due diligence. Thank you.
Anyone else that hasn't asked a question yet? Okay.
Oh, okay. Well, you guys mentioned bond payments possibly are rolling off. It might be helpful to just put those on the website so that we can see when payments are going to be rolling off to make budget calculations kind of on an internal for household basis. Thank you.
It's a good idea, thanks. Does everybody get our e-newsletter where we review updates and meetings and events and news and bad news, good news? All right, last call for questions. All right, that's it. PowerPoint will be on the website. There'll be a link in the e-newsletter. This meeting was also broadcast. Anybody that didn't make it will have a link, and you can share that with your neighbors. Thank you.